I knew that I was a sex addict until the company's team-building exercise. I had forgotten to bring my medicine along for that night and was assigned to a tent with a male colleague. I was in tears as I climaxed right before his eyes. And now that there was no turning back, my impulses spiraled further away from control due to my addiction. My heart had been pounding the moment the supervisor came and told us we were staying the night at the hot springs. If I even had an instant of skin contact with a man, my libido would flare up in minor cases, and in worse cases, I would straight up get an orgasm. I had never told anyone because it was just so embarrassing. And when I was younger, I had presumed I'd simply get better once I was an adult. That was until I realized the symptoms were getting even more out of control. And there was that one time I almost moaned out loud in public, fighting back the embarrassment that almost killed me. I went to the doctor and got some medicine. However, I had forgotten to bring my medicine, as this team-building exercise was organized out of the blue and very far from my home. Even as I fought against the fear eating me inside, warning myself to restrain myself and stay well behind, our supervisor suddenly announced, "Sorry guys, all the rooms have been booked, but we have tents. There aren't many, so we're just going to have to make do. Ruth, you're going to Dean's tent." And that was how we got to the situation right now. Me, a sex addict with no meds within reach, following the burly man into the tent. I did my best to keep to a corner in the tent, biting my lip and closing my eyes, while telling myself to fall asleep as soon as I could, before the last dosage lost effect. But that was when Dean came to me. "What's wrong?" he asked. I could feel his body warmth from my back, and my skin was already crawling. "Nothing. I'm fine. Please just stay away from me." Even as the stimulation extended from my skin to the rest of my body, I knew the pain was coming. I checked my phone and only saw that it was midnight. 6 hours since I had last taken my pills. It was losing effect soon. Soon my whole body was shuddering, while there was a warm stream gushing out between my legs. I kept my head buried between my legs and did my best not to look at Dean. People would mock me for being a skank if they noticed my condition, and I couldn't bear to stay in the company at that point. Meanwhile, Miles Hendricks, the other colleague in the tent, was already snoring out loud. I kept clenching my knuckles, my own nails digging into my palm. The pain calmed me somewhat, and I told Dean, "Sorry, I'm not distancing myself. I'm just not feeling well." Never could I have expected Dean to move toward me, without another word, reaching out with his large, warm palm and pressing it over my forehead. Even as he held his palm steady, I found myself staring at his chest and nothing else. I could also see that distinct collarbone and chiseled chest under his shirt. I seemed to tighten at the very next second and orgasmed. Amid my embarrassment, and the ensuing moan could barely be stifled. Worst of all, I was trembling even worse after I orgasmed, and Dean could clearly feel me shaking. "That's strange. Why are you so flushed? You don't even have a fever," he murmured, not giving up feeling my forehead and cheeks. Just then, I trembled even more and turned my face away, but it was the back of the tent right behind me. Having nowhere else to go, I clenched my jaw so I wouldn't moan again, even as I decided I couldn't stay in this sealed room, when all I could smell was Dean. He wasn't a smoker, so his faint, soapy and hormonal scent was especially recognizable. I could feel all the pores around my opening, as the orgasm left me painfully sensitive to everything. In the heat of the moment, I pushed Dean away and sent him stumbling backward, while I scrambled to crawl out of my tent, not caring that my skirt was short, exposing my wet panties right in front of his eyes. He promptly turned away to stop himself from staring, but he was no brat either. Seemingly struck with a thought, he followed me. Even as I lost control over my body, the fire in my loins was ablaze, and I had never felt libido this violent. All I could think about was Dean's collarbone under his white shirt, his Adam's apple, his healthy-hued skin, and even his warm palm. At that point, I had barely made a few more steps before I dropped to my knees, my sex drive overwhelming me, to the point I couldn't feel my knees painfully hitting the ground. Dean promptly chased me down, trying to keep me on my feet while asking, "What's wrong?" I somehow had this feeling that, if anyone else had fallen sick and dropped on his knees, he wouldn't hesitate to help them. He was usually quiet back at the office, but also always very reliable. But the more helpful he was now, the more skin contact we would have. Even as the stimulations in my body got worse, I could feel my own legs stiffening, the waves of thrill keeping me off my feet. I did my best to stay quiet, or I'd have no explanations if someone was woken up. I bit my teeth as I wrapped my arms firmly around his waist, leaning on him to stand. It was the first time I had ever touched a man this intimately, and I didn't care that I was pressing my breasts against him, as I kept inching upward to his chiseled abs. Even then, my mind could almost be blank. Nonetheless, Dean kept me on my feet, and walked over to the gazebo beside the hot springs. When he helped me sit down, I tried to push him away forcefully again, but the chain of orgasms had long since left me exhausted. That was when we heard the faint moans from a nearby tent. and I was left burying my face in my palms. This was bad. I had just barely calmed down. But Debbie from accounting and her husband had to do that now. Dean looked at me once and pulled me to hide in the nearby bushes, and we did our best not to make a sound. Under the stars' glow, I could see the silhouette of Debbie and her husband, arriving where I had just sat, and they went straight to business. I felt a chain around me, binding me and threatening to rip me apart, as we watched Debbie's husband thrusting deep into her from behind her, while Debbie clasped a palm over her own mouth to stifle her moans. My body, which had barely calmed down, reacted violently, especially with his scent, which by now was burned into my mind. No, this wouldn't do. I begged Debbie and her husband to be quick. As it turned out, they had plenty of stamina. Even as I felt Dean's body warmth seemingly unfurling away from him, I orgasmed again for no reason, and I was whimpering before I knew it. Suddenly, I felt his arm around me, clamping my mouth. I gasped as he almost pulled me into his arms. His heartbeat and his pectoral muscles were all igniting my libido. Shush, he hissed to keep me quiet. Nonetheless, even as I nodded feebly, I started trembling in his arms. He could see my distracted gaze under the moonlight, and remembering my wet panties that he had glimpsed earlier, he soon understood. I tried to free myself from his arms, but I also had to restrain myself, in case Debbie and her husband noticed. While I did, I orgasmed repeatedly, the stimulation almost making me pass out. There was no telling how long had passed, when Debbie and her husband from finance were finally satisfied and returned to their tent, and lifted his palm off my mouth too, and I was gasping for air as he did. But while I should have distanced myself, he was suddenly all I could think about. I was reluctant and powerless to leave him. Ruth Singer, are you wet? I leaped away from his embrace when I heard that, only to inadvertently brush against the bulge between his legs. I didn't even need to feel it to notice that astonishing girth. Flustered, I denied it. Nonetheless, I'm not. Dean frowned, and without another word, he reached under my skirt. Really, he rasped, trailing off and stimulating me all the more. As his coarse fingers brushed against my skin, it seemed to set me on fire, and I tried to squeeze my legs together, only for him to pry them apart. I felt like I was struck by thunder, as he gently brushed his finger against the fringes of my panties. As all my senses kicked into overdrive, it tickled here, there, everywhere, especially there. I pushed against him, but I also desired him as my fingers clenched on his shirt. Ah, Dean, I moaned, not recognizing my own voice. The little devil and the little angel on each of my shoulders were waging war as I wanted him to penetrate me deeply, but I ironically tried to push him away too. Everything was already driving me crazy, when Dean abruptly slid under my panties. Dean, I gasped, the sound ragged and desperate, my hips betraying my will by grinding down against his hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, his gaze darkened, shifting from concern to a raw, heavy hunger that matched the terrifying heat coursing through my veins. The moonlight filtering through the leaves cast shadows across his face, making his sharp jawline look even more severe. You're soaking wet, Ruth, he whispered, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating against my chest. And you're trembling like a leaf. This isn't just a fever. I tried to push him away again, my hands bracing against his solid shoulders, but my knees were water. Please, I begged, though I didn't know what I was begging for him to stop or for him to never stop. It's a condition. I need my pills. I just need to go back to the tent and suffer. Dean interrupted, his thumb making a deliberate, maddening stroke that caused my back to arch violently. You were in agony back there. I could hear you breathing. I could smell it on you. The shame was a physical blow, almost as strong as the lust. He knew. The quiet, reliable Dean from the office, the man who organized spreadsheets and barely spoke in meetings, knew my darkest, dirtiest secret. Don't look at me, I sobbed dryly, squeezing my eyes shut. I can't help it, he admitted. Suddenly, the dynamic shifted. Dean wasn't just helping a sick colleague anymore. The primal atmosphere of the woods, the lingering scent of sex from Debbie and her husband, and my own uncontrollable pheromones had snapped something inside him. He moved his other hand to the small of my back, pulling me flush against him. The contact burned through the thin fabric of his trousers and my skirt. The evidence of his own arousal was undeniable. A hard, demanding ridge that pressed against my stomach. I can help you, he murmured, his lips grazing the sensitive shell of my ear. If you're in pain, let me help. It was the excuse my addiction needed. The little angel on my shoulder was strangled into silence. I stopped fighting. I looked up at him, my eyes glassy and pleading, and nodded. That single nod was the breaking of a dam. Dean didn't hesitate. He lifted me effortlessly, my legs wrapping instinctively around his waist, and carried me deeper into the shadow of the gazebo, away from the moonlight and prying eyes. He pressed me against one of the wooden pillars, his mouth crashing down on mine. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was a collision. He tasted like mint and suppressed desire. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing the friction to ground me. When his hand moved from my thigh to hook the fabric of my panties aside, the relief was so profound I nearly blacked out. "Dean," I moaned into his mouth. "I've got you," he growled. The encounter was a blur of frantic desperation and surprising tenderness. For all my fear of being a skank, Dean treated me like something precious that was about to break. He was thorough, his rhythm steady and powerful, grounding my erratic, drug-deprived spiraling. Every touch sent electricity through my nervous system, but for the first time that night, the orgasm didn't feel like a symptom of a disease. It felt like a connection. When I finally climaxed, it was earth-shattering, a release of tension that had been building since we left the city. I cried out, muffled only by Dean's shoulder, as he followed me over the edge moments later, his groan vibrating through my entire body. Silence returned to the forest, save for the chirping of crickets and our harsh, synchronized breathing. Dean held me up as my legs refused to work, his arms like iron bands around me. Reality crashed back in with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Oh my God. I just had sex with Dean. From the office. Without my meds. In the bushes. I scrambled out of his arms, stumbling back, frantically adjusting my skirt. The shame was back tenfold. "Ruth," he started, reaching out. "Don't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Please just don't. We have to go back." I didn't wait for him. I ran, or at least walked as fast as my shaky legs would allow, back toward the tents. I crawled into the sleeping bag, curled into a tight ball, and pretended to be asleep when he entered a few minutes later. I didn't sleep though. I lay there listening to his breathing, terrified that come morning, everyone would know. But the morning brought a different kind of torture. The team-building exercise continued with a hike. I felt raw, exposed, and hypersensitive. My skin felt too tight for my body. Every time Dean looked at me, and he looked at me often, my heart hammered a warning rhythm. He didn't tell anyone. In fact, he ran interference. When the supervisor tried to assign me to a physically demanding task, Dean stepped in. "Ruth's not feeling well," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "She should stay with the supplies. I'll take her load." He looked at me then, his eyes not mocking, but searching. There was a question there I wasn't ready to answer. I spent the bus ride home with my headphones on, staring out the window, counting the miles until I could get to my apartment and my pill bottle. The next week at the office was a nightmare. I had taken my medication the second I got home, doubling the dose to quell the lingering fire, but the pills felt different now. They numbed the physical symptoms, the random spasms and the constant heat, but they couldn't numb the memory of Dean's hands. My addiction had mutated. I wasn't just craving release, I was craving him. I avoided the break room. I took the stairs instead of the elevator to avoid being trapped with him. I kept my head down. But Dean was persistent. On Thursday, I stayed late to finish a report, thinking the office was empty. I was wrong. "You can't hide forever, Ruth." I jumped, spinning my chair around. Dean was leaning against the doorframe of my cubicle, looking just as good in his business casual attire as he had in the woods. Maybe better. "I'm not hiding," I lied, clutching a file folder to my chest. "I'm working." "You're running," he corrected, walking into my space. The scent of him, soap and that distinct masculine musk, hit me, and despite the medication, my body reacted. My pulse spiked. "We need to talk about what happened." "Nothing happened," I hissed, looking around frantically. "It was a mistake. I was sick. I didn't have my medication. You took advantage of the situation." That stopped him. His expression hardened, hurt flashing in his eyes. "Is that how you remember it? Me taking advantage?" "I'm a sex addict, Dean," I blurted out, the words hanging heavy in the fluorescent air. "I have a chemical imbalance. I get hyper-aroused. It's ugly and it's embarrassing, and without my pills I turn into that. It wasn't me. It was the disease." Dean didn't flinch. He didn't look disgusted. He stepped closer, invading my personal space until I was pressed back against my desk. "I know what it was," he said softly. "But I also know who you were. You think I haven't noticed you before the trip? You think I helped you just because I'm a nice guy?" I blinked, stunned. "What? I've wanted you for months, Ruth. The pills might control the urge, but they don't fake the chemistry. What happened in the woods? That wasn't just biology. That was us." He reached out, his hand hovering over mine. "And frankly, I don't care about the label. I care that you're hurting and you're trying to handle it alone." "I have to handle it alone," I whispered. "It's my burden." "Not anymore." I tried to resist him. I really did. But the universe, and my own body, had other plans. A few weeks later, the pills stopped working effectively. My doctor suggested it was stress-induced resistance. The urges returned, violent and unpredictable. I found myself in the office restroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to stop the tremors. I needed to leave. I needed to go home and lock the door. When I stumbled out into the hallway, I ran straight into Dean. He took one look at my flushed face and dilated pupils and knew. He didn't say a word. He grabbed my arm, steered me into the elevator, and pressed the button for the parking garage. "Dean, I can't," I gasped. "I need to go home." I'm taking you home, he said grimly. He drove me to my apartment. He walked me to the door, and when I tried to say goodbye, he pushed past me inside. Where are your meds? He asked. They're not working, I cried, sliding down the wall. Nothing is working. Dean knelt in front of me. Then let me work. That night marked the beginning of our arrangement. It wasn't just sex, it was caretaking. Dean learned my triggers. He learned the difference between the addiction needing a fix and me wanting him. He became the anchor I had never had. But secrets in a workplace never stay secret forever. Debbie from accounting, the woman we had watched, had noticed us leaving together. Rumors started. Whispers that Ruth, the quiet girl, was sleeping her way up, or that she was easy. The social pressure added to the psychological strain. I started to crack. I felt like I was using Dean, dragging him into my messy, chaotic world. He deserved a normal girlfriend, not a woman who needed him to function like a human dialysis machine for libido. I decided to break it off. I invited him over for dinner, planning to end it. I can't do this anymore, Dean, I said, my voice shaking. People are talking. You're going to get a bad reputation. I'm broken and I'm not going to fix myself by using you as a crutch. Dean set his fork down. He looked calm. Too calm. Are you done? He asked. Dean, please. No, you listen, he stood up. You think this is just about sex for me? You think I'm doing charity work? I love you, Ruth. The air left the room. You what? I love you. I love that you're fierce. I love that you try so hard to be perfect even when you're fighting a war inside your own body. And I love the way you look at me when the fog clears. He walked around the table and pulled me to my feet. So, if you want to break up because you don't love me, fine. Say it. Look me in the eye and say you don't love me. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Because it was a lie. Somewhere between the tent and the office and my bedroom, he had become everything to me. I'm afraid I'll destroy you, I admitted. Let me worry about that. The true test came 2 months later. The company announced another trip, a week-long conference in Las Vegas, the city of sin. For a sex addict, it was walking into the lion's den. I was terrified. I tried to get out of it, but my boss insisted. I can't go, I told Dean. The stimuli, the environment, it's too much. We'll do it together, Dean promised. We share a room. I watch your back. We handle it. Vegas was an assault on the senses. The lights, the noise, the constant undercurrent of debauchery. By the second day, I was fraying at the edges. The medication was barely taking the edge off. During a mixer on the third night, a client, a sleek, aggressive man named Marcus, cornered me. He picked up on my agitation, mistaking it for general availability. He touched my arm, his fingers lingering too long. You look tense, darling, Marcus purred. Why don't we go upstairs and relax? My body betrayed me. The touch sent a jolt of arousal through me. Even as my mind screamed no. I froze, unable to speak, the old panic rising. Suddenly, a warm, heavy hand landed on my shoulder. She's spoken for. Dean's voice was low, dangerous. Marcus sneered. I didn't see a ring. You see me, Dean said, stepping between us, his broad back creating a wall of safety. And that's enough. Walk away. Marcus looked at Dean, sized him up, and decided it wasn't worth the fight. He left. Dean turned to me, seeing the tears welling in my eyes. Room. Now. We went back to the hotel room. I expected him to be angry that I had let Marcus get close. Instead, he locked the door and turned to me. You held out, he said proudly. You didn't go with him. You froze, but you didn't give in. I almost did. I wept. My body wanted to. But your heart didn't. And that's the difference, Ruth. That's the control you've been looking for. He took me then, not with the frantic energy of the forest, but with a slow, deliberate passion that worshipped every inch of me. It was an affirmation. The next morning, I woke up in his arms as the sun hit the Vegas Strip. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up thinking about the urge. I woke up thinking about the man breathing softly against my neck. 3 years later, the wedding was small, held in a garden, not the woods, definitely not near a hot spring. I looked at myself in the mirror. The white dress fit perfectly. My hands were steady. I still took medication. I still had bad days where the impulses flared and I had to breathe through the fire. It wasn't something that just went away. It was a part of me, like the color of my eyes. But I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Dean walked into the waiting room, ignoring the bad luck to see the bride's superstition. He looked devastating in his tuxedo. How are you feeling? He asked, his eyes scanning me for the telltale signs of a flare-up. I'm okay. I smiled and I meant it. Actually, I'm more than okay. He kissed my forehead. Good. Because we have a honeymoon to get to, and I forgot to bring my book. I laughed, a genuine, happy sound that felt light in my chest. I love you, Dean. I love you, Ruth. Sickness and health, remember? Sickness and health, I echoed. As we walked out toward the altar, I squeezed his hand. The hunger was still there, deep down, a sleeping dragon. But holding Dean's hand, I knew that even if the dragon woke up, I had the night standing right beside me, ready to face the fire. I wasn't a victim of my addiction anymore. I was a survivor. And for the first time, the future looked bright, steady, and beautifully controlled.